Okay, so I just wanted to record a quick video just to give you a rundown of how the risk assessment template works and how we approach risk assessments, just in case that might be useful to you. So this is the basic risk assessment form that we use for all our risk assessments, and I think the coronavirus risk is just is approached in the same way, even though it's obviously a more significant risk than we usually face. So what I think is best, from in my opinion, is that a form is filled in like this for each task or area of your business that involves a risk related to coronavirus. So you fill in a form for things such as people entering the shop, a form for staff interacting with each other and with customers, one for how you might deal with hygiene and cleanliness of garments, one for dealing with returns, one for if you've got you're a bigger store, or you've got a communal break area for staff if you've got an office with multiple people potentially in it. All those different areas where risk might be involved in relation to coronavirus, I think needs one of these forms, and then that also needs to be for each site that you might have if you've got multiple branches. So we'll just do a quick example of how this works and then run through how the score rating works. So you'd fill in all this top area, and then in here you might have one of customers entering the shop as a task. They're being assessed an area of risk, and then think of all the different hazards related to customers being in the shop. So an obvious one would be that there would be interaction between customers and staff, and this is done on the basis that at the moment we've put no measures in place to reduce that risk. This is as if it was pre-coronavirus, and we want to do the rate the risk with absolutely no control measures in place at all. So who might be harmed? Customer and staff. They might be harmed obviously by contracting the virus, and existing risk control measures at this point would be none. So then we need to give it a risk rating score, and that's where this risk matrix comes in. So we look at the likelihood of the risk, and also the consequence of that risk, and then we give it a score. Now obviously at the moment the likelihood of that, of people entering the shop, interacting with each other, and therefore spreading the virus around, the likelihood of that happening is very high. So we know that from the virus itself. So 4 or 5 would be the likelihood of people contracting the virus if they're allowed to just interact as normal. The consequence of that would also, as we know, quite serious. So that would be say a 4. Even though the risk of the virus still remains relatively low if people get it, it is quite serious, and it's on the scale it is quite significant compared to many risks that you might face in the workplace. So then we'd fill in a score if we keep getting pop-ups. So score of likelihood would be say a 5, and we'll give it a consequence of a 4. So that gives us a total score of 20 on the matrix. So 4 by 5 gives 20, and that's in the red. So red we define as an unacceptable risk. And what we need to do then is put control measures in place to reduce it to either amber or ideally green, but amber as an absolute minimum. So additional controls for there, we would list those out, an obvious one being restricting number of people in the shop. So just like a supermarket, depending on the size of the shop, you need to decide a number of people who might be allowed in the shop at any given time. So that would, if you're restricting it to say 1 or 2 customers, that would reduce the likelihood, whilst obviously the consequence if you contract coronavirus would remain the same. So what we might say is that the likelihood with that restriction in place actually goes down to 2, but the consequence if you do contract the virus still remains the same of 4, which gives us a risk rating of 8. That would then mean that we're in amber. 2 and 4, we're in amber there, which means that's an acceptable risk. Then you just need to note down who's responsible for monitoring that, and obviously that would be the person in charge of the store or that area of work, and then their job's to monitor it. It was just ultimately the person responsible. So then it'd be running down, filling in all those hazards, giving them a score, and then putting the control measures in place, or documenting those control measures that are going to reduce it to a reasonable level. And then he's going to fill in those for each task, each area where you think that might involve risk, but also that's got to be done by different sites. So if you have got multiple branches, if you have got a head office even, or something like that, it needs to be done for each site and fully documented. And then if you've got that in place and you've carried out those actions that you've identified, then I think at this point that is sort of reasonable to expect in terms of what the health and safety executive might look for if they inspected you. I think they're always aware in health and safety of, you can't reduce risk to zero. You've got to be practical. You've got to consider the fact that you still need to trade, you still need to run a business. But if you can prove, and that you can prove you've documented it and you've done those things and you're taking it seriously, then whatever might come down the line in terms of customers' demands or expectations, or some sort of authority, trading standards, or the health safety executive looking at what you might do, then you've got yourself covered if you've got this kind of documentation in place. So the idea would be that we'll fill all these in, and then we'll file them in the right place, should they be, and then they're on hand for if they're needed to call upon. So hopefully that gives you a rough idea how the process works. I'm happy to speak to people. If you want to drop me a line, phone me, we can talk through things in more detail. If you've got specific issues, any help or advice we can give, no problem at all. If you'd like me to have a look through any completed risk assessments, that's also no problem at all. Just drop us a line. But fundamentally, it's about identifying those risks, documenting what you've done to reduce it down to an acceptable level, and getting those scores down into green and amber. And if you've done that and you're doing those things, then I think that should be putting everyone's mind at ease. So yeah, drop me a line if there's any questions or queries, or if you'd like me to chat through anything more with you. Otherwise, I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you very much.